Merry Christmas from Northern BC. Yes, this is real-time footage. April 29th. We are so thankful for the moisture though. I've been puttering around a lot in the garden, getting it ready. And I was going to do a garden video for you today. Not happening. Not happening. So we're gonna pivot and we're gonna bake some sourdough because a day like this surely calls for some baking, right? In case you're new here, we're a family of 7, almost 8 in northern British Columbia, Canada. We share a lot about food and farming on a homestead level because real food is where it's at, yo.
Good job, Rowan. You mean Anna? You always say the wrong word.
Even though outside's covered in snow, we got some little starts going on inside. I'm about to turn on the light on them for the day, but we got broccoli, cauliflower, cabbages, and some random little thing coming up only in a couple, so I wonder what the children planted there. I said that today we were going to do some baking with sourdough. However, that was a lie because my starter is not happy for baking. So it's been sitting on the counter for a few days. I'm not worried about that layer on top. It smells strong, but not horrible. So there's maybe a 1/4 cup of starter in here, and we're just going to stir it up. If you really wanted, you could scoop off that top layer, but it's not a big deal on this one. Now I'm just going to add in a bit of water to feed it up. I'm going to feed this a little looser than normal because a thicker fed starter rises slower and is ready to use on a longer timeline, which is good if that's your plan, but I would like to mix up a levain or a pre-ferment tonight. So in line with that, I'm also feeding it some fresh ground, this is hard red wheat. Fresh ground wheat starters move faster, and this will be ready for use tonight. Whereas if I fed this thick with a white starter, I don't know if it would be ready for use tonight. Fresh ground wheat really makes your starter jump and injects a lot of vitality into it. So we'll put it in a warm spot. Amongst the other fun things up there, one of that's a jar of tallow and the other is beaver tail. It's my husband and children. Sometimes it's just better to not ask too many questions. I'm left with more questions when I ask questions sometimes. It's sat all day in a nice warm spot and it is doubled and bubbly and happy. And honestly, after a lot of days of neglect, I'm pretty impressed that it's ready to use by bedtime. So we're mixing it up. We got 1/2 cup to a cup of starter going on, and then I add some water, and I always feed my starter when I make a levain. So we've got it up to about the 2 cup line before we're going to mix in flour. And this is on a longer timeline now, so I am going to use all-purpose flour, and I want a milder loaf of bread. My crew is after some sandwich loaves. So depending on what your desired outcome is and what you plan to use the bread for is whether I'm using an organic unbleached all-purpose flour, well I guess it's a bread flour, or I'm using fresh ground wheat. It just really depends what I'm after. The levain is going to get fed at, again, I'm not measuring this, but I guess the starter here is going to get fed thicker because I want to leave it now for a few days. So I'm going to feed it thick, like thick muffin batter consistency. It was fed with cold water, and I'm also going to put it in a cool spot, which is our windowsill in winter, not obviously in summer. Now for the levain, I want it to be a little thinner consistency because I want it to be ready to use in the morning. So as you can see, it's like a softer muffin batter. and it's ready to now be left. And here it is in the morning, all happy and ready for me. You can see it's jiggly, bubbly, doubled. I'm not fully convinced that this levain is ready. It's only been about 10 hours because I went to bed later and woke up earlier than I thought. So what I'm going to do is a float test. I take a jar of water and I put a little spoonful of sourdough starter in it. And very simply, if it floats, it's ready to use. So it's floating and it's ready to use. So we can stir it up and get it added in. The measurements are always based on stirred down starter. I have a couple things of lard that the kids use most of, but not quite all of, so I'm going to scoop them out. You'll notice I don't really measure a lot of things. I follow guidelines, not exact amounts.
Okay.
You probably want a jacket on?
Yeah.
Yeah, Daddy can help you. If you're someone like me who struggles to exactly follow recipes, like when you cook, you're cooking by feel, and that's how you want to bake, but maybe you don't quite know how to bake with sourdough that way yet, I developed a course called Intuitive Sourdough Baking, and it's all about teaching you to pave your own path for the rebel who doesn't like being told what to do. You know, if you feel like you shouldn't need to use a digital scale and a fancy mixer to make sourdough bread, well, this is probably your style. So I'm measuring my milk into the lard jar just to make it easier to bring it over. I don't know how this made it easier. Pregnancy morning brain does not always fully compute. Anyhow, if you go to venisonfordinner.com until May 7th, I have a launch week special. It's 30% off. That's just automatically discounted. You don't need to use a code. So it's $47 US. If you're in Canada or outside of the US, you can use the coupon code Canada at checkout, and that will give you an additional discount to make it somewhat equivalent to our currency. I don't change it every day because that would be ridiculous, but it helps you out if you're not paying in US dollars. So I'm going for like a little more enriched dough today. I got eggs, I got a little bit of sugar in there, and it's going to be delicious. It also looks like I got my sweater on the wood stove this morning, but that would be why this is a thrift store wool work sweater. It's quite comfy though. I love it. I had a little helper this morning who really wanted to measure flour, but he's really good at just dumping flour and not actually measuring it, so I didn't really feel like cleaning it up off the floor. I'm going to add the salt now. Yes, we have a huge bucket of salt because between canning and fermenting and cheese making and tanning hides, we use a lot of salt, so a little jar is not going to get us very far. We buy a 50-pound bag and we put it in a bucket. With pretty much any sourdough recipe, you're going to mix it just until all the flour is combined, and then you're going to leave it for about half an hour. And this is called the autolyse. And time replaces effort here because it's allowing the gluten to do its thing, so you don't have to spend so much time kneading, and the dough just comes together way nicer. So I'm mixing just until it feels about right. I'm aiming for a softer dough today because a softer dough makes a fluffier bun. If you can push the limits on how soft you do it, adding too much flour always gives you more dense bread. When I went back to check on it, this is when I usually work with my hands because I love to stick my hands in dough. I love the tactile feeling of it. I've always loved the process of making bread. It feels a little soft, so I added a bit of flour and just gently mixed it in with my hand, exactly like kneading, until it was right. And I pushed it. I could have added a little bit more flour. It's a little on the soft side, but I'm always pushing limits, friends. It's how I learn what you can and cannot do in the baking and cooking world. Our house is kind of chilly, but by the wood stove is nice and warm. So I'm going to put the bowl up on the cool side of the wood stove because it's very much like there's one side that's warmer, one side that's cooler, and Amos here is getting ready to go outside. He wants to see what the big boys are doing. We've got some potatoes and bacon going for breakfast, and the bread dough is ready to be ignored till lunchtime, or after lunch really, because here we are about 2 o'clock, and it's time to check on how the bread's doing. I'm feeling large and in charge these days, friends, in the 3rd trimester. I'm going to get the counter ready, and Marius is working on dinner. He steamed some prawns in beer, and then he's going to eat a few now, and then he just puts them cold in the fridge for later. He's got big plans for dinner, and everyone's pretty excited about that. So the counter is ready for me, and it's time to shape some bread. I'm thinking today some buns, like a French bread loaf, and just a loaf of sandwich bread. So let me show you how that shakes down. But first, this is how you know. If you poke your dough and the hole doesn't come back out, it's given all it can give and it doesn't need to rise anymore. If the hole comes back out, like because it's still firm and whatever, it needs to rise some more time. It was a little on the sticky side, which is not the end of the world. I just needed some flour on the counter and flour on my hands to make it work. I think this would make 3 loaves of sandwich bread. It's a little smaller amount of dough because I started with less starter than I usually do, but we're going to make one, it's called a pre-shape, where you just shape it and put it off to the side and let it rest there for a minute. Now we're going to get some buns going. My kids love buns. Something about portable bread is much more fun than a loaf. I usually use a bench scraper to divide up my dough and to make rough amounts for the balls. And also, just watch how that dough relaxes. Isn't that amazing to see so up close how the dough relaxes? I don't know, maybe it's just me who's nerdy about it. If my dough was a bit firmer, I would just do a technique where I roll the balls on the counter, but it's a little too soft for that, so I'm just using really well floured hands to just gently shape the buns and put them on a tray. The bread has been rising now for a few hours and it could be baked now. However, the oven is not hot yet and my husband told me dinner's ready and I need to sit down and enjoy dinner. and not be busy in the kitchen, which is a fully respectable request, of course, especially when he's going to put down some lovely moose steaks like that on the table. So when I showed you the bread, it was about an hour ago, and I was going to bake it right then. But then I realized that I wanted to have a bath, and because we conserve water, usually multiple people bath from the same bath water. Take it old school, right? So I like to be the first one in before the little kids bath because they're dirty. So if I was gonna bath before their bedtime, I needed to hop in the bath. So I had a nice magnesium bath. And now they're in the bath and Marius is upstairs supervising them so they don't tidal wave our bedroom. And I just turned the oven on to bake this bread. And that is what I love about sourdough, how forgiving the timelines are. Our house is not very warm right now. The temperature is actually drastically dropping in here because we let the fire die this morning. And it's now like windy and cold and it's like raining and hailing and doing all sorts of things. So Marius just said he thinks he's gonna light the fire before bed. Otherwise it's gonna be really chilly in here in the morning, which is not a big deal, but I'm also not opposed to him lighting the fire before bed. Normally when I film YouTube videos, I make sure I'm dressed and in decent clothing, but tonight, friends, we are just in pajamas because that's just where we're at today. But also, sourdough for me, the rhythms include a lot of like before bed or in the morning things. Bread is usually not baking right before bed, usually that's before dinner, but either way, fresh out of the bath and in my pajamas is how you get me this morning or this evening. I did end up having to swap a shirt because the other one, tops were not meeting bottoms. This belly is large and in charge, like I said. It didn't quite want to come out. I could have got a butter knife and I'm sure it would have helped, but a little whack and it was fine. I should have used a smaller loaf pan or put more dough in it. It looked like a big chunk was missing from the bottom of the loaf, but it actually was just fine. However, even though it's a short loaf, it's a lovely looking loaf, friends. It's so soft and delicious. People always do these things where they show you like how squishy a slice of bread is or something, and I'm never quite sure how to do that. It always feels awkward to me. Even though the loaf of French bread, it's kind of like a ciabatta French bread. I don't know how to explain it. It looked pretty sad going into the oven, but it had some awesome oven spring and it looks delicious on the inside. And I'm going to use this either for garlic bread or for like a French bread pizza because my crew really likes that. So I'm going to tuck that away for another day. And let's see what these buns look like. Nice and squishy. That's the whole thing. If you can push boundaries on adding less flour, you will get fluffier buns. So with all that fresh bread this ready for us this morning, what else does one have for breakfast but eggs and toast, especially when the chickens are laying so many eggs these days, which is an awesome blessing because winter never has as many eggs. And actually upstairs, as I crack these eggs, there's an incubator full of chicks hatching because we hatch all our own replacement layers as well as our meat birds. So starting today, we're actually going to be saving eggs for the next round of hatching. I find timeline-wise, starting to save eggs around when chicks are hatching gives us time to save eggs and them still be nice and fresh. But then the next round, the ones that were hatching, they're into the brooder and we have time to clean the incubator well before we want to be setting eggs again. So we might do 3 hatches this year, or we might just do 2. The boys are actually getting midget white turkeys to raise from a hatchery. And I hope that we can save some back for incubating eggs next year. We'll see how it goes. So thank you so much for joining us today, friends. After breakfast, I need to go work at my desk for a few hours on some computer work things like editing this video. As well as, there's just, when you're a business owner, there is always administrative tasks to be done. However, I'm hoping to maybe bake some cookies this afternoon because enough people have said the word chocolate chip cookies that I want to eat not just chocolate chip cookies, but to be completely honest, I want to eat chocolate chip cookie dough. And I feel zero remorse about that. So let's start the day with something more nutritious. Scrambled eggs. I put almond butter and strawberry jam on my toast. Well, that's what pretty much everybody had. And just have the most awesome day, friends. But quick, one last plug. If you're interested in sourdough, especially old school methods and learning how to bake intuitively, make sure you check out venisonfordinner.com/shop, or it's actually on the main page too. You can find Intuitive Sourdough Baking, which is on sale until May 7th.